Hello, RoahmMythril here once again, getting back to Magmammal 3, and after that bit of a costume unlock jump scare, see the end of the previous video for details on that, it's time for the judge commentary on the last two stages we just played, starting with 141st place, Brightman Remix by Legius. This stage got a 40.35, with a 3.2 in difficulty, 16.8 in design, 12 in fun, 6.4 in creativity, 9.6 in aesthetics, 9 in functionality, and it had a 25% time penalty. Mick. Remixing an official Mega Man level, that's not a high score with creativity point blank. But if the goal was just to make a fun Brightman level, well, this isn't terrible. This remix does a lot more with Batan's and Brightman's platform than the original did, and the result can be entertaining. I particularly enjoyed the final climb, the token room, props for that checkpoint, and the first couple of crickets. That being said, the last cricket section, if you don't go for the token, is downright annoying. Mostly because of the 10-second wait for it to hop through a spike corridor, followed immediately by a surprise Alekin. That was a damper on my enjoyment. In fact, the level's core issue is a number of surprise/poorly placed enemies just like that Alekin. The very first Alekin jumps you right before the first arc platform. The first ring appears while you're riding an arc platform towards it. The lone Bolton and Nutten is a semi-camouflaged against a blue background and appears mid-jump, so on and so forth. It's a common and annoying issue, and it's the one I'd advise adjusting above all else. The mini-bosses can also be insufferable Buster only, and Sparkman should have been reskinned to a lightning-throwing Brightman, but considering the easy application of our weapons, neither of those are severe issues in the long run. By no means the greatest, but I found it fun enough. Shinryu. Initial impressions didn't exactly start off high for this level, considering one of the first things that happens is an enemy popping up out of thin air, which can easily blindside you during a crucial jump. Unfortunately, this more or less serves as foreshadowing for how most of the stage plays out. When it comes to virtually any given obstacle, they absolutely need proper telegraphs to avoid becoming cheap hits. This is especially true of jumping segments, which is what a majority of this level consists of. There's a few moments here that border on being cheap with what little time you have to react to them, such as the first ring that appears in the stage along with the wall of dust blocks at the end of the same segment. They're certainly doable, but they're still really punishing moments for being so early in the level. The rest of the stage follows a similar pattern for both the normal and token paths. For the latter, however, I'm really not a fan of how it ends. That mini-boss and the arcing platforms really don't mesh well together, and the fight becomes downright tedious unless you're abusing Laser Trident or Magnetic Shockwave. What little remains of the stage afterwards is actually pretty decent. The jumps aren't quite as involved as some of the ones earlier in the stage, but I still enjoyed that part a fair amount aside from the final jump to the boss door. The timing required to land on each of those arcing platforms is incredibly tight, to the point where I honestly don't blame anyone for using Magnet Beam or Rush to just skip it. As for the boss, I normally wouldn't hold it against a level for using a vanilla dev kit boss, but this one is a special case given the name of the stage itself. I get that Brightman isn't in the dev kit, but having the wrong Robot Master show up at the end comes off as a bad substitute for what could have been. Ultimately, I think the climax of the level would have landed better if it had been a series of tough but fair platforming segments rather than Sparkman suddenly showing up. Patchy. Brightman's Bright Iteration. Has anyone been keeping count on the amount of remix stages that got submitted? This one is not bad, but it's not very impressive either. Some of the enemy additions seem like they were added for the simple fact that they're electric theme, which felt shoehorned in and doesn't quite blend in well with the level design. A lot of the challenges of the stage simply involve riding those platforms over instant death hazards, which can become frustrating really quickly after failing and being sent back a few times. I get that the platforms were one of the more memorable gimmicks out of the original Brightman stage, but this stage just really stretched out the usage of them until it became tedious. I like what you did with one room with a gachapon, though I can say the same for when the same setup was used for the snail mini-boss. Having to time your jumps for attacking on top of dealing with attack timing in order to hit the snail's eyes when they're vulnerable, it's too much for a mini-boss fight. By contrast, the main boss, Sparkman, is just pathetic. That's right, the stage doesn't even end with Brightman, the smartest Robot Master. I know not everyone is capable of programming a boss, but come on. You could have even just done a simple sprite change. The arena is more varied than your typical flat plane ones, but Sparkman is still such a relatively simple boss that it really doesn't make the fight all that different or stand out. Flashman 85. This remix does an admirable job of balancing innovation with preservation, but I don't think the right decisions were made about what to keep and what to change. If there's anything about the source material that needs an update, it's the nonsensical theming. I'm already dubious about grasshoppers, bagworms, and totem poles populating a power plant. snails, miniature planets, and removing Brightman from his own level add insult to injury. Moving the level outdoors or replacing/respriting the offending enemies, Octobulb's minions would have fit perfectly, and Brightman would look awesome with Sparkman's moveset, would have been preferable to expanding the roster. The larger roster is handled clumsily too. New hazards invariably appear when there's no time to react to them, let alone learn how they function. Enemies are forgotten as suddenly as they're introduced. Setups with good potential are mishandled. The darkness maze is pointless when you can stand around safely until the lights return. Gachapon and Eskaroo need moving platforms that are higher and slower respectively to be at all fair. Sparkman's chamber is disappointingly identical to the one in Mega Man 3. Personally, I was hoping for some crossover with the Game Boy iteration of this level. The graphics look almost as good as they do in the original, marred only by some architectural contrivances with spikes and platform tracks. Each segment has a distinct feel, if not a clean difficulty progression, and checkpoints are mostly where they need to be. Power-up placement and level flow are appropriately deliberate, but could use a little polish, as could Sparkman's teleporter destination targeting. Not quite sure what you mean by that one. Continuous vertical scrolling in the last section may induce queasiness. I like that the level tries lots of new things, especially in the second half. I just wish they had panned out better. Ace Spark. You know the idea about introducing gimmicks is to introduce them, and not to throw the player into immediate death spikes everywhere? This also applies to enemies, by the way. The most egregious is the first red, falling, swinging platform, which is the first gimmick seen in the stage. Not everyone is going to remember every detail about Brightman's stage, after all. Several of the enemies and gimmicks require you to be Nostradamus, where they are placed in unexpected locations that you need to know about in order to even survive. Bolton and Nutten, an enemy that is invincible when you try to pass it, is a prime example. Both of the mini-bosses were pretty infuriating. Of the two, the Eskaroo was the most ridiculous, with times that it could kill you without much opportunity to dodge its eyes. The upper route was interesting, but locked you out of acquiring the token without any indication it would do this. Not a fan. The stage shows potential with its ideas, and the final climb especially was unique and a fair challenge. It is a shame that the stage did not start at an easier difficulty and build up to this. Sparkman also existed. At least swap the sprites, dude. So yeah, this one just kind of being a remix stage. I get that it probably wasn't the most creative thing that you could have gone with for a contest like this. Overall, it does show promise, though. I will agree, though, that there were a lot of gotcha traps, just surprise enemy placement, and yeah, going Buster only, the two mini-bosses were a combination of kind of tedious and kind of frustrating, especially the snail. Gachapon wasn't as bad, but yeah, dodging the eyes from Eskaroo, as well as the bombs, that was a bit of a thing, thank goodness for iframes. But, yeah. Overall, a decent enough stage, and I don't really hold it against the stage for that weirdness that happened with me with that one Brightman platform right at the end that just didn't spawn. Still not sure why that happened, but I don't blame the stage creator for that one. That seems like it might be a minor engine issue. I'm not really sure what caused it, if there were too many things for it to spawn or what. Next, we have 140th place, Akudama Empire Mothership by Mecha Shadow. 40.8 with a 3.2 in difficulty, 16 in design, 13 in fun, 8 in creativity, 7.8 in aesthetics, and 9.6 in functionality, again with a 25% time penalty. This has to have been based on another game. That name feels way too specific. Mid. Starting with literally just Magical Dorope's final stage. There we go, Magical Dorope. I have heard that name? I don't know that I'm familiar with it, though. Starting with literally just Magical Dorope's final stage was a bold move, though perhaps not the best for creative first impressions. Thankfully, Namonaki is a fun fight. She's simple, but the mobility of her spread shot adds just the right level of complication to make things a little interesting. I completely understand why a brand new boss wasn't created for the endgame, but I do think more could have been done with a rematch. For one idea, perhaps putting some of the early levels flame jets in the floor. It'd be a simple way to limit the player's movement and add a twist to the fight. At the same time, it shouldn't go overboard into unfair or not fun. As for the level, it doesn't quite live up to the boss fight. It starts off well enough, a simple variety of early enemies, and my only real issue is the flame jets aren't obvious enough. However, the level quickly overloads its assets. I'm pretty sure I count 10 different enemy types before the first mid-stage checkpoint, and the number only grows. Incidentally, players, if you miss the second token, open the menu and hit retry so the checkpoint below doesn't force a restart. Magical Doropi wasn't quite this crazy with enemy types in its different stages, making them a hassle to handle. It also doesn't help that the surprise stars are blue, against the blue background. Please use some more contrast. Beyond the enemy bloat, this has a few bad habits with its gimmicks. The majority of the concepts are good, but they don't show up nearly enough. This is a huge shame, and part of why I suggest using at least one for Namonaki's rematch. Beyond that, forced weapon usage in Magical Doropi worked well due to a lack of proper weapon energy. Mega Man, for whatever reason, doesn't have infinite ammo here, and that makes those segments far more irritating than they would be in their home game. Conceptually, this is alright. Magical Doropi mixes well with Mega Man for obvious reasons, and I did enjoy Namonaki's fight. However, this tries to use too much at once, and as a result, it doesn't do enough with what it has. Shinryu. I was honestly a bit skeptical when I first saw what this stage was referencing. A level based on Magical Kids Doropi seems like a solid choice for this type of contest, given how many times the original game has been compared to Mega Man. Okay, so it's a Mega Man-like. At the same time, though, it was a game that had a lot of issues as well, so on one hand, I was worried that some of those issues would find their way here. On the other hand, I was hopeful that those issues would be addressed and result in a good reimagining of the source material. Things kicked off interestingly enough with a boss fight at the start, though an understandably easy one, given it was meant to be a setup for a harder fight at the end. From there, the level plays out pretty decently for a while. Most of the enemies get proper introductions, and they tend to play off the room layouts well, up until a certain point. After about midway through the stage, the rooms start to become oversaturated with enemies. It's not uncommon for anywhere between 2 or 4 flying enemies to suddenly show up from the side of the screen, especially during the last few sections of the level. Combine this with very cramped areas, such as the underwater segments, along with enemies that have awkward movement patterns, the light purple sphere guys that fire when directly over you being the main culprit, and things get chaotic very quickly. Also, while this may be a controversial stance, I think the inclusion of those star-shaped enemies was a bad choice. The way they suddenly pop into existence to surround and close in on you was annoying in the original Doropi, and it's annoying here, doubly so when they're practically the same color as the background. It's a shame because if it weren't for the enemy spam, I think this would be a mostly serviceable level, if a little rough around the edges. Besides cutting down on the amount of enemies, I would think a good place to start would be with fleshing out the gimmicks. The fire jets barely show up, and the flying gears only became a threat in the third token room, which is a shame because it had the potential to be a pretty decent recurring gimmick. That aside, the only other platforming tricks this stage pulls is when you're forced to use the magnet beam. I didn't mind these sections at first since you're given free weapon refills along the way, and there was very little chance you'd run out of ammo even before that. Towards the end though, these segments get ruined due to the enemy placement. There's at least 2 parts I can recall where you'll be prompted to fire out a magnet beam and walk across to the other side, only to be blindsided by enemies with few options to safely fight back. Yeah, that definitely got me a few times, got me to panic, change weapons, and thus lose the magnet beam. Fun times. As for the end, I'm sorry to hear you weren't able to make the boss fight how you originally intended it to be, all for very understandable reasons. Even though what we got was essentially the first boss again with a slightly different room layout, at the very least, I can still appreciate the thought of not wanting things to end on a complete anticlimax. Like I said before, there's a lot of potential in the concept of remaking stuff from Doropi. It just needed a bit more time, a bit more fine-tuning in this case. Patchy. Empires. In space. References that I don't get, so the odd enemy designs and the way they are spammed here probably all closely resemble the game. Doesn't excuse this entry for how it's going to be scored, though. Strange forced weapon usage throughout that does not immediately convey to players that they should use them. I initially thought you have to damage boost yourself through the spikes with the lasers shooting frequently. The laser shooters above the water, they're just kinda there. The lasers bounce off the water surface, so they never really reach you while you're submerged. Background is somewhat busy looking and kinda blends in with the tile set, hindering the readability of the actual layout of the stage sometimes. I often kept walking, thinking it's a straight path ahead, only to fall into spikes that I didn't even realize were there at first. I feel like the first encounter with the boss is harder than the final one, since there you have less room to maneuver, while you have a lot more space to dodge around in the final arena. Not a bad boss, just kinda a little anticlimactic to end it easier than how it started. Flashman85. I haven't played the Cryon Conquest / Magical Kids Doropi. Cryon Conquest! Okay, that name I'm familiar with. So, I guess that's like a depends on where it was released thing. I vaguely remember trying the Cryon Conquest, and I didn't really gel with it. I forget exactly why, but yeah, it just didn't quite do it for me somehow. But yeah, I definitely remember the name Cryon Conquest. Okay, so now we know. I haven't played the Cryon Conquest / Magical Kids Doropi, so I can't speak with any authority about how successful this level is as a crossover. My research suggests that the aesthetics and gameplay are in line with the original, though perhaps a little off the mark with the choice of music and number of enemies on any given screen. One thing I can say for sure is that, in lieu of a magic broom, the level needs either infinite rush jet energy or free weapon refills before the spike gaps. Strictly viewing this as a Mega Man level, there are some ups and downs, but no up and downs, thankfully. Upsides include a slew of novel hazards, enjoyably designed underwater segments, and satisfying boss fights bookending the level. Downsides include a very loosely structured challenge progression, overly distant checkpoints, and an unforgiving final stretch. Visually, there's a lot to take in. Enemies tend to blend in with the background, and the background often has a similar texture to the foreground, so I can't always tell what's what at a quick glance. Eye fatigue starts to set in after a while, and changing up the backgrounds only helps so much. Orally, I have a similar problem. The music is fine for a while, but it wears thin by the end of the level. I'd be fine with a high screen count otherwise. In terms of construction, flow, token placement, and technical polish, the level is solid. The few oversights are minor enough not to mention. I would have liked marks to have been hidden in a secret room or not present at all. The climax of the level is the worst place to receive unnecessary excuses from a Kirby character. I like the level well enough, but I wonder whether I'd be more appreciative or less impressed if I were more familiar with the source material. A-Spark. You cannot just take assets from another game, use them in the same manner as the original game, and expect them to work out well. The Cryon Conquest has specific alterations to the Mega Man style that make them work in that game, such as the ability to aim, infinite weapon usage, and even little things like oxygen meters. The entire level just becomes a mess, and a pretty boring one at that. There's simply too many enemies on screen at any given time throughout the whole stage, some of which come out of nowhere, and others blend into the background. The player takes a lot of unexpected damage. Particularly frustrating enemies were the squid, a waste of time and doesn't work because you can shoot upwards in the source game, and the armored ball, where the solution to avoiding it is to stand still, making it another huge waste of time. The starfish were completely unavoidable if you had not been through a section before, and very easy to slide into, and the rocket fish are pretty much the same issue. The stage has a whole lot of spikes, including after vertical transitions, making the stage feel very tight given how many enemies there are around. This would not have been as bad if you had added reasonable checkpoint placement throughout, but there are far too few of these. Despite all of these, the stage did not feel very hard, but often frustrates based on unavoidable deaths and enemies that are difficult to see. The forced weapon usage, while not an issue when used well, is fairly pointless in this stage. The original game was built around the broom mechanic and had a huge number of puzzles built around it. This type of weapon does not exist in this Mega Man game. You needed to make these sections more interactive rather than use weapons to bypass spikes repeatedly. Given how many gimmicks appear but are only used once, it feels like you attempted to include everyone from the base game in this level, and none of them were used in an interesting way. Almost everything in the stage was used better in the source game, from puzzles to enemy placement and usage. The boss was a nice start to the stage, although I would have liked a different climax and not fought the same thing again. The token rooms were the highlight, hidden well and had nice challenges within. I appreciate the effort put into recreating the original game, but more effort should have been made to make it work for Mega Man. Okay, so that explains a lot. Now we know the source material, and that, yes, I guess there was a broom you could fly around in the original game that didn't have fuel limits, so that explains all the forced utility usage here that didn't quite work as well in a Mega Man setting. Like they said, had Rushjet had infinite fuel, that might have helped. Instead, we get the situation I had of using Magnet Beam, and then, oh crud, it's an enemy, I need to shoot. Oh, switching to a weapon just killed me. Whoops. So, yeah. And I definitely have to agree on the comments that rooms felt overly saturated with enemies, and way too often the enemies blended in with the background. I had a lot of trouble with that in the underwater segments. So, yeah, I kind of feel that one. But overall, a decent stage. I'd probably appreciate it more if I had played more of Cryon Conquest when I did. But yeah, at the end of the day, it is another reference level, but it tried to do something, and I can appreciate that. I mean, for example, my main claim to fame as far as designing a level was basically remaking Jewel Man's stage in Super Mario Bros. X, so again, anything I say, take with a grain of salt. But with that, that's where we're going to call it for now, so thank you very much for watching. I hope you're enjoying the series so far, and I shall see you again next time. Until then, Spin! Yes, for those wondering, I do occasionally watch Vinesauce. Also, the metal spinning just looks adorable. I don't need any other excuse. Spin! For great justice! Spin!